Players, NFL draft. We've got grades, draft reports, and mock drafts. So many reasons to love the NFL draft process. And here we are, still about 6 months away. Never too early to dig deeper on some of those draftable players, not just talk about where you like them, but why you like them. And for that, we bring on the draft expert himself, Dane Brugler. We will cover as many positions here as we can, talk about why one guy slots over another here on Scouting the League. Everyone, and welcome to Scouting the League. No long intro today because I want all the time with Dane to talk players that we can get. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, share, yada, yada, yada. Neil Stratton's here, as always, along for the ride. He is at Inside the League. I am Rodrik David at Right Step ADV. And you already know today's guest, Dane Brugler from The Athletic at DP Brugler. That's where you can find him. If you're listening, I would be shocked if you're not already following, but if you're not, make sure you go out over, check him out. Dane, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, appreciate you guys having me back on. It's like you said, 6 months away, so there's so much more work to be done. But we're about a month away from when scouts are filing those final reports. From tape study and being on campus, and so I feel like we have a good idea of where these players are, and we still have a few more months. You want to get most of the hay in the barn before the draft process starts in January, when we have the All-Star games and combine and workouts and all that. So still plenty we have to work on, but I feel like we're in a much better shape now than we were last time we talked.
Yeah, that was, again, we talked in early September. Again, we were doing everything based off of 2023 film. Again, you hit it. You want to have a feel for those guys. Who do I really need to watch? Who do I have major questions on? Obviously, we got our risers throughout this year. We got underclassmen that are jumping under the radar now. Again, depending on the team, their format, you're talking December 10th, maybe final report date. Really, sometime in December, you're probably going to hit some December meeting reports. But again, like you said, the hay's in the barn. The film, their game film, is the most important thing. Again, a lot will be said about the combine, pro days, pre-draft process, moving grades around. Again, traditionally, your best drafting teams, that grade is not going to change much. You're going to slot guys. You're going to really narrow in on them, but it's really getting those 2024 final grades locked in. And again, that's where we're at. We're here, second week of November. Most scouts are off the road come Thanksgiving time, and then it's really just a couple weeks of that final stretch to get those reports submitted. Before we jump in today on where you have your guys, again, brand new top 50 list coming out, to say that things are unsettled, especially at the quarterback position. Again, that obviously everybody wants to talk quarterbacks, but again, top players at several positions really up for debate. Real quick, let's go for language purposes. Neil and I talked about it at length 2 weeks ago. Again, if you want to scout, if you want to evaluate, you better have some consistent language. It's something I've always respected about you. Again, what kind of scale do you use when you start talking about these guys that allows you to, again, not just I like this guy over this guy, but here's why, these traits? Talk about your grade scale.
Yeah, and obviously teams have their own grading scale, numerical grading scale, and I mean, Rodrik, you can talk more about that from your time in the league. For me, on the outside looking in, and because I have to write about these guys and give grades, I wish I could have my own grading scale, but that's not really what the readers and fans want. They want to know, okay, what round is he going in? But for me personally, that's why, okay, the summary of my report, that's the most important part. But the most important part of the summary, it's like the closing argument in court, in a legal battle. That closing argument, you want to be what sells the main point you want to get across. And included in that, I think you have to factor in what's the projection, because not all second round picks are the same. Right. Some second round picks are going to be, all right, plug and play guard. He might not have a high ceiling, but you feel like he can start throughout the length of his rookie contract. where other second round picks are not quite ready to see the field. But you look at the upside. You look at okay, by year 2, he should be competing for a job for us in the secondary. Like so, all these I have to use first round, second round, third round
Oh yeah.
just for the sake of my audience.
Yep.
But the context is so important when you talk about just having those rounds. And so that's why in the summary, the last few lines, that's where I really try to hammer home. Okay, these are what you need to know about him the most. These are the key traits to focus on. And then here is my projection for what he's going to be in the league. And, how quickly can you see him on the field? What's his ceiling as a player? And try to get as specific as possible with that, with using that summary in the report.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. A round based again. It was from Thomas to Terry. We went from a old New England model where the numbers meant nothing to anybody on the outside to, again, with Terry, it was round based. You were a 1-0, a 2-0, and that meant a first round, a second round, a third round. And again, within each one of those, again, you got a little wiggle room to slide guys around. Our friend Jordan Reed over at ESPN calls it the quarterback tax. A third round graded quarterback, when's he going? Probably middle of the first round. And again, you talk about that with those premier positions. So again, there's always going to be that sliding around like you talked about. But again, you talk about your traits, you talk about that round base, you talk about the comparisons and all that. All of that comes back into the final conversation, that final summary. Again, whether you're talking about it with your audience or whether a scout sitting there talking about with the head coach and GM, sometimes the owner, that final line that you talk about him, hey, this guy is a this round player. I would take him here with our pick, and this is why. So let's get into it. Let's get into these players. Neil, anything to add before we jump in with players?
Yeah, one question. Dane, I know you grade yourself. How often are the players you've got in your initial top 50 drafted outside of the second round, let's say, when we get to April?
Yeah, and that's an interesting part of this because there's two aspects of this, right? There's the evaluation and then there's the valuation where, my main thing is I want to be right on these players 3 years from now, not necessarily on draft weekend. And so, it's a constant thing for me. There will be times where I know I'm going to be wrong about a player on draft weekend where I might have him as a top 50 player, but he might not be drafted. In this draft cycle, Drew Phillips for the Giants, nickel from Kentucky. He's a top 50 pick all day for me, and I think he fell just outside of that where the Giants drafted him. But the way he's playing, I feel very confident 3 years from now when we look back at this past draft class, he's going to look like a player that should have been drafted in the top 50. So I think there's different aspects to the evaluation, the valuation, and not being too hard on yourself when maybe it didn't go exactly what you thought on draft weekend, because there's 32 different teams, 32 different opinions of these players. And so you're not always going to be right on draft weekend, but when you look back, I feel pretty good about my batting average, about where players were actually drafted and whether or not they should have been drafted that high.
Yeah. And I think an element we won't even get into today that everybody knows is that character piece, right? Again, from the outside, without really getting to dig, again, the film is one thing. And then you start hearing, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story that absolutely affects maybe a round, maybe half a round. And again, those are ones where it's like, it becomes really, really difficult because, again, you've got 32 ways of doing things, 32 different opinions on, hey, can we deal? Can we manage? Can we work with this character person, football, whatever that character piece is. And again, at the end of the day, most of what we're doing, most of what I'm doing, not doing a ton of character digging, maybe talking to some sources. Again, you're putting the tape on, and that's number one thing. And that character can absolutely affect where a guy goes. Again, good players are going to go. We all know that, but again, it may affect it. From 35 maybe to 60 is certainly that can cause a drop outside that top 50.
If it was only about the tape, this job would be so much easier.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Because you're just focusing on what the tape tells you. But obviously there's so much from the outside looking in that we don't know. We don't have the access. And that's where I lean on, my buddies in the league to let me know about, okay, what do the coaches say about this guy? I won't say the player, but there's a player being talked about as a top 15 pick in this draft who, a scout flat out said one of the worst guys he's ever talked about or talked to and had a conversation. And it's like, okay, I don't know what to do with that information.
Yeah.
I think there are some positions that you can overlook it a little bit more than others. Obviously, you don't want to hear that about a quarterback, and this wasn't a quarterback, but maybe there are some positions where you let it slide a little bit more. There are some organizations that are better equipped to deal with certain things like that. And so, and then also the medicals. Obviously, until we get to the combine, that's not something that we'll really dive into. But, there are a couple players in this class, Josh Simmons, the left tackle from Ohio State, who was really rising and looked like he was going to be in play for OT1 in this class, at least going to make it a conversation. He has a major knee injury against Oregon, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, how do you even rank him at this point until we know more details?
Right.
There's a couple guys like that. So the character, the medical, if it was only about the tape, this would be a lot easier to do.
No question. The scouts wouldn't be able to do the job that they do. Again, so much is about digging, source gathering, information gathering, making those relationships. So again, perfect spot to start. You mentioned the O-line right there. So let's start with that O-line. Again, some of the top guys, Will Campbell, LSU, Emory Jones, LSU. I think he's maybe fallen a little bit. You've got Kelvin Banks at Texas, a guy that I know you referenced last time we talked that I really like, the Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota, Wyatt Millum of West Virginia, kind of on the tackle side. You've got Savanea at Arizona. You've got Donovan Jackson, who's now playing left tackle for Ohio State. Again, that's, I think, only going to help his stock. You've got Parker Brailsford, Alabama. You've got a William and Mary, Charles Grant. You've got Tate Ratledge of Georgia. Where kind of who do you like in this tackle group? Who's moved up? Maybe who's fallen off a little bit? And again, one of the things we want to talk about is why. What has started to separate these guys as the season's gone?
Yeah, and let's be clear from the start. There's no Joe Alt in this class. There's not that tag. You can make an argument there's no J.C. Latham. And last year was so tackle rich at the top with Olufashinu and Fuaga from Oregon State, and Amarius Mims went 17th overall in last year's first round.
Might have been the most talented of the group. Yeah,
he would be an easy top 5 pick in this draft, in my opinion, just because of the traits that he brings to the table. And so many teams, just their hunger for more offensive line help. But in this class, Will Campbell from LSU, the left tackle, is my top offensive lineman in this draft, at least at this point. But, I mean, you can throw on the Arkansas tape and see him go against Landon Jackson, who got him a few times. Throw on the Texas A&M tape. Texas A&M has one of the best defensive lines in the country. They were able to break him down more than you want to see. And just this past weekend against Alabama, same type of deal where he played well most of the game, but had a penalty or gave up a couple plays. It's just it's easier to shine a light on these offensive linemen when you don't do something correctly. The best thing for an offensive lineman, right, is we just don't notice you, right? Yeah. And so this offensive line class is a step back from what we saw last year.
Dane?
What's that?
Is Campbell a 1 if he's part of the 24 class?
It's a good question. The Campbell that we've seen this year, I think if he were in last year's class, maybe he goes in between Mims and Guyton. It's tough to say. And maybe not. I think there'd be a lot of differing opinions on where exactly he would go. Some teams like him best inside because his arm length is going to be right around 33. It might be 32 and 7/8. It might be 33 and a quarter. Until we get to the combine and get that official measurement. But that speaks to how a lot of teams view him. I mean, he is a good player. I mean, there are times where he looks like Jake Matthews in terms of the body 100%. Type, in terms of the fluidity in the run game, his ability to sustain in pass pro. There's a lot more physical finish to the way he plays, which is what you love to see. But again, there are times where long arms will get him. His anchor will be tested by power when rushers are able to get into his breastplate, and he has some tightness in his lower half. He has a tough time really answering those inside moves or anchoring down versus power. So, he is not a slam dunk top 10 pick in this draft or in any draft. So Will Campbell, he's still my top offensive lineman in this class. It doesn't sound like I'm selling him very well, but that's just kind of how this class is.
Yep.
So
Kelvin Banks.
Dane, is
Sorry,
he
go ahead.
number one because he's got the highest floor or the highest ceiling?
Highest floor, I think. I mean, he has been starting at left tackle for LSU for 3 years, and he's still 20 years old. He is a young player. He turns 21, I think, in January, maybe.
He doesn't have Mims level upside. Accurate to say?
I don't think he has that type, because the traits are just different, so I don't think he has the same type of upside as Mims, because the traits are so different. But I do feel good about him in terms of you're getting a quality offensive lineman. He might never be an all-pro. He might never be a Pro Bowler. But I think you're getting a quality offensive lineman who has put good stuff on his film and should continue to get better, even if it is moving inside. I'd love to keep him at tackle, let him fail there first before I'm moving him inside. But different teams view that differently. I think the two Texas tackles are kind of next for me. And there's differing opinions that are on the league about what order they should be in. Because I think if there's an Amarius Mims in this class, it's Cam Williams at Texas, the right tackle, who 6'5", 335, his ability to move at that size is just, it's remarkable. And so now he leads the FBS in penalties, which is not ideal. And there are times, you throw on the Georgia tape, throw on some other tapes where, his inexperience really shows. He has 10 or 11 career starts to his name, and that inexperience shows up quite a bit. But again, teams are drafting not what you've done, but what you're going to do. And with Williams, he has a lot of traits that you look at and say, all right, yeah, we can't coach that, but we feel like he is coachable enough in these other areas where we think he's going to be a long-term starter for us. So if there is an Amarius Mims in this class, it is Cam Williams. Now, at left tackle Kelvin Banks, he's a little bit of the opposite, where he has a high floor, I think. Again, another player that might move inside at guard. But there's some sloppiness on his film as well. So it's kind of a trend in this class where you see the talent, but you also see a lot of sloppy play from offensive linemen that you really don't want to see in a first-round pick.
Yeah.
If you're a team drafting, Dane, and you've got two guards you just paid, and you got to have a tackle.
Yeah.
Who's your guy?
I would draft Will Campbell in the first round and say, okay, let's because he's 6'6", 315. He moves well, and the length isn't ideal, but I don't think that it necessarily leads to a ton of negative plays. I mean, I think there are some things he needs to clean up, but it's not necessarily length related. So I would, if I have to take a tackle in this class, it would be Will Campbell. But I wouldn't feel as great about it as the guys that were drafted top 10 last year.
Yeah.
And like I said about Josh Simmons from Ohio State, I was really excited for him, but now he's really off the table until we know more about his injury, if he'll even be in this draft class because of that injury. And then after the Texas guys, then we get into more of the this guy shows flashes, but where's the consistency? Josh Connerly from Oregon, he's one of those guys where the feet are fantastic, the recovery balance, that's kind of his calling card, where, all right, you put yourself in a bad position here. Your hands are all over the place. You are not properly countering what the pass rusher's throwing at you, but your recovery balance to still recover and execute and lose slowly, that is something that you just can't teach. And so Josh Connerly, I think that is going to help him. Former 5-star. I mean, it's not like he came out of nowhere, but he has gotten better this year to the point where I would not be surprised at all if he ends up in the first round.
Yeah. It becomes with a group like this where there's no consensus, where, again, you're grading flashes, this becomes an interesting time where I remember, again, when we became a Blesto team in the Falcons, we weren't told to look at juniors, but you're starting to go back through your notes and like, all right, who are those underclassmen tackles that happen to look good, that have high traits, that are maybe in that that again, unknown. Maybe he's only a first year starter, maybe he's got a season and a half, and it's like, if this guy jumps in, all of a sudden he could be that name that just starts flying up the board that maybe is not known nationally. Maybe only some teams, maybe the school didn't even talk about him too much because they're trying to encourage him to come back. But that underclassmen, redshirt sophomores, and true juniors, some of those guys all of a sudden right now are starting to think, man, if I came out this year's class, I could be OT number one with the way it's looking. So you want to add even more intrigue to it, and another element of another layer of, let's have a little bit of fun talking about some of these young guys. Again, that'll be something that NFL teams are starting to deal with really late December as those underclassmen declare and it really becomes more clear. You got your late calls. But again, we won't even get into those guys now. Let's kick it inside a little bit. Donovan Jackson obviously kicking out, playing some left tackle for Ohio State now because they've lost their top two. You've got, Charles Grant, you got Tate Ratledge at Georgia. Who are some interior guys that you really like or, feel really good about? Because obviously there were a couple of Jackson Powers and again, Graham Barton, both first round guys last year that are interior guys now.
Yeah, and we talked about how some of these guys might be moved inside. I think another one of those guys, Wyatt Millum from West Virginia, who only 32-inch arms, has held up well at left tackle for West Virginia, and he's a lefty. He was a big time baseball recruit as a left-handed pitcher in high school. Actually committed to Marshall at one point to play baseball. Until all of a sudden Alabama and Notre Dame started blowing up to play football, and things changed pretty quickly. But I think I'm not 100% confident what position he's going to play. I just know he's one of the top 50 players in this draft. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a good chance he moves inside to guard for a lot of teams. One of my favorite players in this draft, and he might be the first small school player drafted, is Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. Yeah. Obviously, we know the Bison have a pipeline of these guys, Cody Mock and Dylan Radens and several before them. Zabel's kind of in that same mold where he's a left tackle, but arms are 32 and a quarter. He moves really well, good feet, good flexibility, active with his hands. He will stun, he will snatch. But I think that he's going to be better suited inside. And he actually played a lot of center in high school. He might be the best center in this class. This is not a great center class. You mentioned Brailford from Alabama. He's an underclassman who will have a decision to make. And it's an interesting one because, kind of like you set up, he could take advantage of a bad center class and really capitalize on that. Or you go back to school, get paid with NIL, and all of a sudden, maybe next year at this time, you're a first round pick. Because teams are talking about, all right, well, you're kind of light in the pants. Are you 285, 290? Just you need more development before you get to our level. So a guy like Brailford has a really interesting decision. But Zabel, I think, is in that top 50 mix as a college tackle, might move inside. The Arizona kid, who's, again, another 7-yard playing tackle, but I like him best inside a guard. He has the length to stay outside. He's at over 34-inch arms, but just his play style, the way he moves, I think he's more comfortable and confident. I think he's gotten better at tackle, but he's going to be better inside a return to guard, where I think he's played most of his time in high school and then now in college. So this is a class where we're going to be talking about a lot of these guys moving inside, and it could make for a really good class of guards because of the offensive linemen that teams have projected to move over from tackle.
Yeah. This is one of those drafts where good teams at the back of the first round are going to have access to maybe some of the top offensive linemen that they may not have because maybe it's watered down at the top a little bit. Some of those good players, last year we saw it with the defensive guys. This year it could be that O-line group because there's no consensus. A good team sitting at number 20 could love one of these interior guys and get maybe on their board the best interior offensive lineman at number 20 when most years that player's gone 8, 9, 10. So again, you saw it with all the Jared Verse, again, where Jared Verse went last year, with where Latu went with some of these guys. So it becomes really good drafting teams that are good, sitting there in the playoffs, really good players fall into them, as happens every year. But again, O-line, more and more teams are winning. Hey, we're going big. We're going in the trenches. Eagles model. Again, a little bit of what Baltimore's done, taking guys like Linderbaum in the first round. And again, good teams win in the trenches. Let's kick it over to the other side of the ball, stay in the trenches. Edges and then interior guys, because there are some dudes on the inside that are, again, 3 down players. Let's start with the edges, though. Abdul Carter, again, freak, developmental. Again, when he shows it off, he shows it off. Same thing with James Pierce at Tennessee. When he goes, it's special. You got Michael Williams, you got Nick Sorton, you got JT Tuimalau at Ohio State. Kind of where do those guys stack out for you?
Yeah, and I think these guys are the flashes are awesome. I mean, they get you excited. You wish there was maybe a little bit more consistency, but especially a guy like Abdul Carter, who he started the year for me at number 2 overall in my preseason top 50, which was a projection because moving from linebacker to more of a full-time edge rusher role, it took a little bit of time, but especially the last few weeks, he has really played outstanding. The burst off the ball, the dip, and the ability to get around the tackle, win the corner consistently. I mean, the poor Washington left tackle on that tape. My goodness. And he's got physical. He shows up with physicality in the run. I mean, he's explosive in his hands. He can detach, make plays. So yeah, Abdul Carter, I think, is going to be somewhere in that top 10. It's just a matter of, okay, will he be top 5, top 3, maybe even, or maybe towards the back end? I think there's be differing opinions on that. Same thing with Williams, who missed some time with an injury. Man, I mean, he is a physical freak. The way he look, like he's not quite Travon Walker, but kind of in that mold where he's a physical freak the way he looks, but he's also going to test really well. The length, I cannot wait to see how long this guy's arms are. As it is unbelievable to see when he puts them to good use, when he times it up well. Blockers just don't have an answer. And so if he develops in that area and just understands how to use all of those gifts to his advantage, it's going to click and he's going to become a really good player. But there's a projection involved. Same thing with James Pierce, who isn't even a consistent starter for Tennessee. He's more of a third down player who, there's some concern about holding up against the run and just being a guy that the coaches consistently trust in every situation. But he's long. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Will McDonald, who coming out of Iowa State, you see the ability, you see the length. Some questions about just how does he understand how to use everything in the right way? Does he understand? Can he play against the run? These different things. There's those questions with Pierce. And so different teams will look at it a little bit differently, which will determine, is he going to be a top 12 pick, top 20 pick, somewhere in there. He's too talented to fall too far.
Those
but
traits,
yeah,
again, the traits jump off on him. It's just, again, what coach and what front office. Again, you go all the way back to when Bruce Irvin was drafted. Again, a very, very role player, but again, he can rush the passer, right?
So Pierce it seemed like entered this offseason, whatever, as the DE1. Now it sounds like he's the third name you've mentioned. Is it more because the other guys have transcended him because of the seasons they've had? Or is it because Pierce has kind of had a down year?
Well, honestly, for me, my edge rankings really haven't changed. It's been Carter and then Mikel Williams, then Pierce. That's kind of how it's played out so far for me. I think the only maybe shakeup would be Jalen Walker, Mikel Williams' teammate at Georgia, who's an off-ball linebacker in that scheme. But you talk to scouts and you're like, okay, well, how do you best use him? And well, I want him getting after the quarterback. So some teams are looking at Jalen Walker, number 11, and saying, okay, let's move him to an edge role. Let's get him going after the quarterback more consistently. We saw what he did against Texas and Ewers and those tackles. Let's really lean into that. So Jalen Walker is up there in that top 15 mix as a guy that could kind of crash the party. The Texas A&M kids are interesting. Scorton's a really good player. Someone gave me a floated out a comp of an Adrian Claiborne, which I think makes a lot of sense, with just body type and play style. Brandon Thorne does a great job. He gave me that one. I think that makes sense for him. But actually, I have Shamar Stewart, the Texas A&M defensive lineman. I actually have rated higher than Scorton because he's 290 and he's doing some freaky stuff out there. he looks more like a defensive tackle, but they'll play him on the edge. They'll play him over the B gap, over the tackle. They'll move him all over the place. And he's just from the first quarter to the fourth quarter, snap to finish, he is going full go. The motor's revving. And then you factor in the freaky stuff that he does. I have Stewart ranked a lot higher than I think most people do, at least on the media side, because of just the ability that he has and the fact that I think he'll be a riser throughout the process, riser in quotes. And one other edge rusher I wanted to mention, a guy who I don't hear talked about that much, but is another guy that I think will rise for people. And he's in my top 50, and that's Mike Green from Marshall. A little bit undersized, 6'3", 250-ish. But this guy, watching him work in space is outstanding. So he's a good space athlete. But then going up against tackles, going up against any type of blocker, there's more physicality to him than I expected. So he can work off wham blocks, lead blocks. He can find the runner in the run game. But the bread and butter is always going to be, can he get to the quarterback? And he does. He literally leads the FBS in sacks right now with 13. So he's an explosive mover, both laterally and then upfield. He can make guys miss, make blockers miss with how quick he is. And then just the development of his hands and the way that he's getting better in that respect is really impressive. So I think when it's all said and done, Mike Green, he's going to be somewhere in that top 50 mix. And so, he made it in this update.
Dane, we've seen two cornerbacks that were in the day one conversation, Ravel and Ben Morrison, I guess, at Notre Dame. Another guy, Harold Perkins, is a guy who's not playing any more football this season. Where you got him?
Yeah, and Perkins was always tough because it's okay what position. He's a great athlete, but not a true edge rusher. He wasn't making consistent plays as an off-ball player either. So, it's great that when you can, you're quote-unquote hybrid and you can do these different things, but at the end of the day, what do you do great? We know you're a good athlete, but, so I think with Perkins, he's going to have an interesting decision to make after this year. We know LSU has money. They can, throw some money at him in NIL. And, I think that would be the smart thing to go back and really define yourself on defense. But if he tests the waters, he'll be probably somewhere in the second round, I guess. But that's not a lock. He didn't make it here in this top 50 for me. ECU kid did. Ravel, as long as, it's an ACL tear, as long as at the combine, the rehab's going well, everything, the doctors give you 2 thumbs up that, he'll be able to play and compete at some point during his rookie season. I still think you take him in the first round. Benjamin Morrison's an interesting one because he wasn't necessarily playing at a first round level this year before the hip injury. And so you factor that in. I think that most of the feedback I got on Morrison was second round, maybe third round. And so you factor in the injury, and now I don't think he's a lock for those top 50 picks. So that's an interesting one with Morrison, and one that he didn't make this top 50 update, but if he declares and the medicals are looking good, I could see him getting back into that top 50 at some point.
Well, we went straight from edges to corners because, again, they usually work well together. If you've got good edges, your corners are going to be better. And if you got good corners, you got edges better. That's got to lead us to the best player in the draft, Dane. Is he a corner or is he a wide receiver? Obviously, Travis Hunter at CU. Do we need to talk wide receivers? Do we need to talk corners here?
Both, I guess, because he's going to want to do it. And I think if anybody could, it's him. If I'm a team picking in the top 10 and I'm looking at Travis Hunter, I'm hoping that he buys into your vision of, all right, you're a full-time corner, and then we will introduce 15, 20 snaps a game on offense for you to go make some plays happen. Because you have to have a primary position and a secondary position. There's no such thing as having 2 primary positions in the NFL.
Travis Hunter might tell you differently. And Prime is definitely going to tell you differently.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that. But that's a big factor in all this 100%. Is making
You've
sure
got to spend somewhere during the weekend meetings. I mean, take the on-field playing out of it. You've got to spend, because of the way the playbook is, because of the way game planning is, that alone, you've got to spend a week at a primary position.
No doubt. And all the feedback I've heard is, great kid, smart player, both on the field, off the field. So I think he has, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I mean, obviously he's just this phenomenal athlete, but I think he deserves a ton of credit for just the commitment, the focus, the intelligence that it takes to handle both these responsibilities. You have to know the offense, the defense. You have to spend time in the receiver room, the DB room. He even plays some special teams. So yeah, you have to be a super athlete, but you also have to be super committed to the mental side. And that's something where I don't think Travis Hunter gets enough credit. He is the best player in this draft. I think I don't think it's quite as simple as like when Myles Garrett was coming out in that draft. It's like, okay, number one, easy. That's your pick. But I think it's close to that. I think one is pretty easy on my board, and then 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a discussion, and we try to figure it out. But one is pretty much set, and that's Travis Hunter. But I think if you're going to consider him a corner, he is a number one player in this draft. If he comes out and says, you know what, I want to be a receiver, I'm giving up defense, I still think he's a top 10 pick.
Really?
But it's not as much of a slam dunk at one. All of a sudden, it's a conversation about, okay, are you wide receiver one? Is it between you and T-Mac at Arizona? Where's Luther Burden from Missouri fit in? I think that becomes really interesting. If you want to throw a comp on it, I think there's some Garrett Wilson there. Body type, the way they play,
Wow.
the ball skills, the instincts. I think and Garrett Wilson was a top 10 pick deservedly. And I think, Hunter would be drafted somewhere in the top 10 if he's strictly a receiver. But that's also why teams are going to be open to the idea of him getting those offensive snaps, even if he's a full-time corner.
Dane, you think that he's finished as a blocker? You think he's finished as a route runner enough to be the kind of guy like a Garrett Wilson who stepped right in and was offensive rookie of the year? He's that good on offense as well as on defense?
I think he has it in him to do that, yeah. And I think it's more a comparison in terms of skill sets and ability and, along those lines instead of just them being the same player. But the size, the way they move, and their instincts at the catch point are just phenomenal. I mean, Garrett Wilson is a smaller player, but he consistently wins in traffic. He consistently wins those contested windows because he's so smart framing the football, reaching back, adjusting, and making plays. Travis Hunter has that. And that's what makes him so special on defense because of his ability to shut down the catch point because of his instincts for just the ball skills that he has. And so it translates on both sides. And I think if Hunter is strictly a receiver, yeah, I think you feel comfortable drafting him top 10 and saying, okay, we have a Garrett Wilson style of player on our offense now.
Yeah.
When you talk to teams, are enough of them saying, I mean, did they share that? Would they say, okay, if the guy went wide receiver only, we'd be comfortable with that? It seemed, my guess would be that they'd still want to get some snaps out of cornerback, but do you think they'd be open to that based on what you've heard?
Yeah, and I think a lot of them are keeping an open mind because it's they're not 100% sure exactly what the right route is. It's a lot easier, obviously, if you're a full-time corner and then you're just sprinkling in on defense, as opposed to the opposite, where if you're a full-time offensive player, it's not as easy to just sprinkle in some of those defensive plays. And I mean, we haven't seen this in the NFL, right? I mean, that's why it's easy to doubt it because we haven't seen it. Even thinking back to Deion Sanders, yeah, he made an impact on offense, but his impact was more on defense and special teams.
Right.
And then he did a little bit on offense.
Yeah.
It wasn't like this. He wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver. So it's just something we've never seen. And so I understand why there's going to be a lot of doubting from both in the league and outside the league. But I think teams are at least keeping an open mind to it.
Dane, if he's in last year's draft, Caleb Williams was the clear-cut number one, and that was part because the Bears, again, depending on who you asked, it was no question they were going quarterback, Justin Fields aside. Right. Even really the top three were all quarterback. Is he making a play last year for the number one overall player in that class when there were three quarterbacks where there were last year?
I mean, you almost have to eliminate quarterbacks from the conversation when we talk like this, because even my top 50, I don't understand. It's hard to rank quarterbacks with other positions. Just they're weighted
100%.
Differently.
Yeah,
it's almost like you should do a non-quarterback rankings and a quarterback rankings to do.
Start the trend, Dane.
I wish
Tell
my
the
editors
bosses,
would let me do that.
tell the
Yeah.
bosses it's time to do it.
Because that's what makes sense, and I'm sure we'll talk about quarterbacks here in a second, but like it's just hard to factor in because if one of these quarterbacks hits, or even if they're league average, you're taking them over a B level tackle or whatever it is. So factoring in these quarterbacks into a top 50 like this is it can be silly at times. But looking at last year's class, I think it would be for me personally, my top 5 or my top 4 was Caleb at 1, just my top 4 players, Caleb at 1, Marvin Harrison Jr. 2, Neighbors 3, and then Drake May 4, and then Jaden might have been 5. So that was just my own personal rankings of the top 5 players. If Hunter were in that draft, I think he would have been competing with Neighbors at 3 to see where he would have been. I think I was set on 1, set on 2, and then I think I would have probably leaned Neighbors just with I think Neighbors would have been number 1 in most other draft classes. He just happened to be in a class with Harrison and those quarterbacks. So I think Hunter probably would have been my 4th ranked player, 4th or 5th in last year's draft, maybe before May or after May. But obviously, just the fact that he's in that conversation says a lot about his ability and what type of impact he can have at the next level. And so I think teams will, or not teams, but fans will look at how many interceptions does he have? How many receiving yards does he have? And kind of look at that way too much and not focus on how special of an athlete that he is and how special the ball skills are.
Yeah, the ball skills are something else. Again, the way he goes and attacks it as a corner looks like a wide receiver, which again you can understand why. But the way he covers the edge, and again, you want to talk about the off-field stuff, the playbook stuff, the learning stuff. Again, little banged up, but he can play 70, 80 snaps a game at the level and speed he has. That's a huge credit. And again, credit to the character and the way he takes care of himself. So,
and if you are going to ding him, I think that is one area where, because he's about 180 pounds.
Right.
He's not a big guy. And so, taking those hits at the NFL level is another thing, as opposed to the Big 12.
Yeah.
No offense, but kind of, it's just, it's
everybody
different.
understands.
Yeah. So it's, that's another part of just, because once you get and obviously he's getting paid now, but once you get in the NFL, it's different types of money, and preserving yourself for to hold up past your rookie deal, that's at least something he needs to consider.
Yeah, and getting past 12, 13, 14 games. We got a few more of those in the NFL. So sticking with the wide receivers, again, a guy that I personally love, Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona. You mentioned Luther Burden. We've got Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State. Any real movement? Is it kind of that wide receiver group? Again, they've all kind of performed the way we expected them to perform. Again, there's a good 4 or 5 first-round wide receivers here. Anybody that's really popping up, jumping onto this list that we need to keep an eye
on? Well, first with T-Mac, this season has not gone the way Arizona has wanted, obviously. The win-loss record, and it's been pretty rough. But McMillan was still the first player in college football to go over 1,000 yards receiving this year, which just speaks to how important he is to that offense and that team, and just how talented he is. He's just so different than I think a lot of these other guys, these other receivers are that we've seen, because he's tall and lean, but he has Gumby-ish movements. He's so fluid and flexible. Not a precise route runner by any means, and that's kind of just his route refinement needs maturation. The pacing, the manipulation, it's something he has to work on. And because there are a lot of contested catches on his tape, and he's just not maybe that elite separator that you ideally want when you talk about drafting a receiver in the top 10. But his tracking skills and his high pointing skills, it's crazy. And he always catches the ball away from his body. It does not matter what type of position he is in. He is always catching the ball away from his body with his hands. So he's a really talented player, and I think he's going to be a starting receiver in the NFL very quickly as soon as he is drafted. I'm interested in let's say Travis Hunter's a corner. And let's say that, it's Travis or T-Mac and Luther Burden are the top 2 receivers. who is going to be that wide receiver 3? Who is, we know the NFL wants more receivers. We saw how many of them go in the top 40 picks last year. Who is going to be, like, if Brian Thomas, if he stayed at LSU and was in this draft class, I think he'd be, top 10 pick. That's before what he's done at the NFL level. Like, he was that type of, I couldn't believe he fell to the 23rd pick or wherever it was last year. With this class, I think teams are really open-minded to, okay, who's going to be that receiver that steps up and is that wide receiver 3. I think Emeka Egbuka is a player that you absolutely appreciate because he does everything well. Doesn't have like there isn't a major hole in his game. But at the same time, I don't think there's one trait that you can point to and say, okay, yeah, we're going to hang our hat on that. And that's going to make him a truly impactful player for us. Now, I think he's going to have mostly second round grades in the league, and that might end up, he could go 26th or 24th when it's all said and done, but I think he's gonna have mostly second round grades from NFL teams. I don't think he's quite the prospect that, say, like Jackson Smith-Njigba was, and he went like 20th, right around there, so a little bit behind him. But again, because this is a class with wide receivers that it's kind of open-ended about, all right, who's wide receiver 3, he's going to have a chance. Evan Stewart at Oregon, we saw what he did against Ohio State. Tez Johnson is hurt with the shoulder, so he's going to be out a few weeks. Can Evan Stewart, who's getting paid a lot of money, former 5-star, entered the portal after A&M, Oregon paid him a lot of money to go there. Can he step up? He actually has more games of 20 receiving yards or less than he does 100 yards games. And so it's like, okay, I see you're talented, clearly, but I want to see it more, and because it's always traits over production, but I still want to see production too. I still want to see you perform, especially when you have a Heisman winning quarterback, not Heisman winning, Heisman contender quarterback,
right?
Dylan Gabriel, and you are now the top receiver in this offense. I want to see you do it more. And so Evan Stewart, he's in the top 50. It's just a matter of, can he really emerge over, this last month of the season into the playoffs? Going to have a lot of opportunity playing for the number 1 ranked team. So Evan Stewart's a guy to watch. And then kid at Stanford, I'm kind of bullish on him. I'm a big fan. They can't get him the football, and that's not his fault. And so he's not going to have the stats that I think you ideally want in a receiver. But, he's a big guy, 6'2", 215, tremendous with the ball in the air. He's able to slow down that ball, adjust his speed, tracks the ball well. He's a true X in that offense. And so, he's a guy that I physically put together, but also has speed, also has catch point skills. I'm a big fan. Watch the NC State tape with Ayo Manoa. Really impressive. That was one of the games where they actually could get him the football, and you watch it and see, okay, yeah, that's a Sunday receiver. Now, what's his draft value? That's where I think a lot of people might be a little bit split. Like, okay, is he a second rounder? Can he sneak into that first round? I think there'll be a lot of differing opinions on there. But for me, he's more in the high end. I'm more of a believer in number 13 for Stanford than most people.
Yeah, he's fun to watch. Again, it's one you have to burn some film to find some stuff for him sometimes. And that's where, hey, if you want to pull up that PFF cut up of just the targets or whatever, again, it just stands out. But again, there's always guys like that. And again, the NFL teams, through the process, talk about the process, through the process, he'll sort himself out. So
I will say, though, one of the benefits of him not getting a ton of targets is you get to see him block. This man loves to block. He loves to put his it is. And it's the mentality. It's the physicality. He will put his man on his back. And even when it's, like Stanford's not a great team, the game's out of hand late in the game, he's still blocking his butt off. And that's what you love to see. It sounds like, or he looks like a guy that someone, told him, hey, teams are watching the tape from start to finish. They're going to see these plays no matter what. And, he's bought into that because he is showing up as a blocker, even late in the games.
Yeah. Dane, we're seeing more and more of these 40 records fall. Seems like every year in Indianapolis. Who are going to be the freaky testers in Indy, or I guess at their pro days, based on the guys you've talked about?
Based on the guys I've talked about, I don't know. Like
what that you haven't talked about?
Yeah, some of these receivers are going to run really well. I mean, they always do. I am interested to see what T-Mac runs. Like, does he get into 4.4s, or is he just, a 4.53
Mhm.
receiver? Not that that's should matter all that much, but it would be nice to see him get into the 4.4s.
Yeah.
Um, I think we're just talking who's going to run the fastest. Arian Smith at Georgia, who is not a big guy. I mean, he's under 6 foot, around 180 pounds, but a track athlete. He has been up and down the season on tape in just terms of a football player, but you can't teach that speed. He is going to run extremely well. So that's going to be impressive to watch. But you know what? If he were maybe a little bit better, maybe Carson Beck doesn't have more interceptions and touchdowns this year. Like the Carson Beck uh, kind of storyline and the way things have gone for him have not been ideal. And really that entire Georgia offense.
Yeah.
But they got plenty of big opportunities coming up here where they can kind of change that narrative. So yeah, I think Luther Burden's going to run really well, especially when he comes in over 210, close to 215. I'm interested to see how Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State, is going to test, because he's a freak of a running back. How is that going to translate to the testing numbers? I think that'll
Yeah.
be really interesting. Colston Loveland, the tight end from Michigan, who some teams are actually writing him up as a wide receiver because Michigan will use him a lot outside.
Mhm.
And he has that lean body type where it reminds me a lot of Dalton Kincaid when he's coming out of Utah, where not necessarily someone that you're going to draft because of what he does in line, but you line him up in the slot, you line him up out wide, line him up in the backfield, let him use that speed and get open. He has really good catch point skills, probably not on the Kincaid level, but close. But he might actually be a better athlete than Dalton Kincaid is. So Colston Loveland's a player that I think is going to test really well and be a guy we're talking about as a top 20 pick.
Before we move to quarterbacks, and we're running out of time here, obviously we got to get to them. But is it fair to say that there isn't a receiver in this class who's got the true long speed, the big play kind of guy that is going to be just run the go routes and doing that the way that we've seen some of these receivers this year do?
Give me an example. Like, who are you referring?
Just,
What type
I
of
mean,
player?
I guess it's such a position that lends itself to explosiveness so much.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've got guys that can move the chains. We've got guys that are willing to go over the middle. But if you can really get beyond the defense and take the top off, is there that guy in this draft that can do that the way we think of
Xavier
it?
Worthy.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I don't know if we'll have
Worthy.
well, and even as Xavier Worthy, we're seeing how incomplete of a receiver.
Right.
We know he can run,
Right.
but he's very incomplete as a receiver, which is why most teams had him graded as a second or third round pick, and the Chiefs take him first round. And there have been times where that's looked like a smart move, other times where it hasn't. We'll see his development. There's no Worthies in this class, I don't think, in terms of guys that have that just world class speed. But I mentioned Evan Stewart earlier from Oregon. We saw what he did against those Ohio State corners where he's just running past them. And so he has that type of ability, but it's like, okay, why aren't you doing this more consistently? Why aren't you, down to down being a more consistent player? And Texas A&M had those questions, and I want to see more at Oregon before we, really classify you as a true top 40 guy. We should be talking about you as a first round pick. The flashes are nice, but let's see more consistency. I think some of the second level or the secondary receivers in this class, guys that will go between rounds 2 and 4, there's some interesting guys in there. Jalen Royals from Utah State, Torrey Horton, Colorado State, Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. There's a lot of interesting guys that are kind of freaky. Savion Williams from TCU is a real physical freak. He, as big as he is to move like he does, Savion Williams from TCU is going to be a player that I think gains steam throughout the draft process just because of how freaky he is.
Yeah. I mean, Dane, I've got to mention some names just because I'm just going to end up saying them because I love the player so much. Again, Mason Graham at Michigan. Love the player. He's a first round pick, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. He might not be as dominant as like a Quinn Williams, a guy that, okay, no brainer, top 5. Like, I don't know that he's quite there, but I hate using the word safe. Like, the word should not be used in any draft discussion. But if you had to put a safe label on a player, I think that would be my guy, Mason Graham, because even if he only ends up being a solid starter, I think he's going to play in the NFL for a long time because of his tenacity, his strength. Yeah. He was a 5-sport athlete in high school. Like, there's just so much things to like about him.
Yeah. So we're not going to talk about tight ends. Again, you mentioned Colston Loveland. Tyler Warren at Penn State's a fun one. The Brian Easel kid at Clemson. Again, it's a good group of tight ends. Same thing at running back. This is a good running back group. Obviously,
deep.
My pick for the Heisman Trophy, Ashton Jeanty, does things. It doesn't matter if you put 10 or 11 in the box. Boise State's going to hand him the ball, and he's going to find a way. So he's such a good running back. Again, you've got Ollie Gordon, Marion Hampton at North Carolina. You've got both running backs at Ohio State, a really good group of running backs. Where you value him, again, I'm on the record. I think he's going to be somewhere between 10 and 19. Jeanty, again, you could maybe sneak a second back in there at the end of the first round. Again, a really good batch of running backs. Again, there's some good linebackers. There's some good safeties. But we got to talk about quarterbacks. It's what the people want. We could go another hour talking about these quarterbacks. Again, Last time we talked, Carson Beck was kind of QB1 for me. He was at QB1 question. Again, he was in the conversation. Holy cow, the fall has been big for him. Shadir Sanders on the other side, a lot of differing opinion. He has played good football. You've got Quinn Ewers. Has he taken the steps? You've got Drew Allar, highlight throws, but letdowns. And then I think your guy, Garrett Nussmeier, all of a sudden he's maybe quarterback one, has a couple big opportunities that, come on, Garrett, just give me the – how does quarterback shake out for you? Talk to us about quarterbacks.
After the first 6 weeks, I was ready to put quarterback one on Nussmeier. He was doing actual quarterback things. The movement in the pocket, the way the ball comes off his hand, the ball placement, the anticipation. Like, there were things on his tape, throw on the Ole Miss tape. You throw on. He was doing things that are like that will translate. That is something that I want to see on Sundays. And factor in his dad and growing up around the game and all of that. That plays a factor as well. But then, then Texas A&M tape, I think, is a perfect example. You watch the first half of Texas A&M, and you get what I'm saying. But then you watch the second half, and it's like, okay, 3 interceptions, and you're pressing, and you just can't make that throw. Now, it's not all him. They don't have a run game. The offensive line, as much as we talk about, Will Campbell and Emory Jones, I don't think has played well at all this year. But the offensive line has not played up to the level of expectations. Their best or the receiver that I feel best about is Mason Taylor, the tight end, who I think is a really underrated NFL prospect. He should be drafted in the second round, and I think he plays for a long time because of how versatile and impactful he can be. Player. So with Nussmeier, he has 10 starts to his name. And that shows up quite a bit. Now, I think no quarterback in this draft is going to have better information about his draft projection than Nussmeier, considering his dad is, the quarterback coach for the Eagles and has more connections in the NFL than, any set of parents in this draft. So he will have a good idea of how teams view him. And talking to scouts, they are very, optimistic about him. They see the talent, but obviously what he's done the last 2 games, you watch him against Alabama, you watch that second half against A&M, and it's like he's clearly not ready. And so hopefully he goes back to school, and maybe at this time next year, we're talking about a Joe Burrow type of rise. Who knows how he'll perform next year with a new set of circumstances. So Nussmeier, he's in the top 50, but I feel much better about hopefully him going back to school than coming out. And so this is a quarterback class where I don't have a single quarterback in my top 20. And again, if I'm going to put and again, this goes back to how do you rank quarterbacks with these other players? But if I'm not 100% on board or have full conviction that you are going to be a quarterback that's going to help lead me to the playoffs and win football games, how could I put you in the top 20? And that's kind of how I feel about this class. I get the intrigue with a lot of these guys. And if I could get one of these quarterbacks in the late first round, all right, I'm willing to roll the dice and see what we have. But if the asking price is the top 10, based where we are right now, it's the middle of November. You still have some part of the process left. I can't get there, even with the Cam Ward, Shadir Sanders. Cam Ward is number 1 for me right now. I get the upside. The best comparison I have for him is fireworks, just physical fireworks, because he creates explosives, some of these dazzling plays because he's elusive in the pocket. The natural arm talent is unmatched. But fireworks also have that big warning label on them. And when Ward gets careless, he has a very loose playing style. And sometimes that looseness leads to big plays. It helps him. But other times that looseness leads to careless plays, whether it's taking a sack, whether it's throwing a turnover worthy ball down the field. He was not the reason that Miami lost to Georgia Tech over the weekend. But you could make the argument that Georgia Tech was the closest thing to a real defense that Miami has faced all year. And they got after him and they kept that Miami offense in check. And Cam Ward wasn't seeing everything as fast as he needed to. Now, all the character stuff that I've heard has been awesome. Great kid, confident kid. A lot of things that make you feel good about the player and the person. And he's going to have a lot more opportunities here throughout November and then into the playoff, assuming Miami makes it. How does he perform against? I would love to see Miami face off against a Georgia or an Ohio State. How does he work against that type of defense? I think that'll tell us a lot more about Cam Ward. But I get the upside with him. I get why right now I think just based on talks with scouts, he is the favorite to be the first quarterback drafted at this point. Now, where that is that top 5, top 10? Like it's hard to answer right now, but I think he is the favorite at this point. And then with Shedeur Sanders, he's a tougher one because I think there's a lot to like about his package of skills. He's poised, he's tough, he has a natural feel for accuracy, his touch, his ability to layer the football. My big issue with him is the inconsistent way he manages the pocket. He loves to drift. He welcomes negative plays because he holds onto the ball too long. Yes, some of that's the offensive line. A lot of it's on him. Not all sacks are on the offensive line. A lot of that is on the quarterback. And he reminds me a lot of, this isn't a perfect comparison, but stick with me. He reminds me a lot of Jordan Love without the high-end physical traits. So, you've got these athletic movements, the willingness to almost preferred way of playing where you're throwing on from different platforms. Sometimes you're just backpedaling, it's just the way you play. But can Sanders get away with that without Love's arm strength, without his size? That's my kind of concern with him. Is I think he has the talent, the skills, the personality to be an NFL starter. But are you going to be a guy that's going to help me consistently win, lead me to the playoffs? I'm just not there with Shedeur. And I'm not even going to touch any of the baggage questions or, anything like that because I don't know enough about it to really say one way or the other. But it's at least something that's out there. And not just with fans. I'm talking about with scouts. It's something that comes up with those conversations. So I like the ball placement and I like the toughness. That's a good place to start. Yeah. But does he have enough else to really ascend and lead an offense? He certainly could, but there are some question marks there for me. So for me, right now, I have Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, Shedeur Sanders, Garrett Nussmeier, 1 through 4. Milroe's interesting because he's so rare as a prospect. He's 6'1", 225, and he's going to probably run the 4.3s or at least low 4.4s. He's a special athlete. He's kind of like a rocket-fueled Jalen Hurts in a lot of ways. But if you draft Jalen Milroe, you really have to change your entire offense.
Right.
You have to accommodate his skill set, which could end up paying dividends if you really lean into it. But it could also, because ball placement is good, but it's not a strength of his. I think ideally I'd love to see him go back to Alabama one more year and see what he could do with the young receivers they have. But if he does come out, I still think he's going to be somewhere in that first round discussion, top 40 discussion. But it's going to take a team that's really going to buy into everything. You can't have half in, half out with Jalen Milroe. If you're drafting him, you are all in on that skill set and what he does best. So not every team's going to be on board with that.
Dane, is there a comp for Jalen Milroe?
Rocket fuel Jalen Hurts. I think
I guess.
I
think of him as much more physical runner than Jalen Hurts. I think that's kind of where he hangs his hat. And,
the big difference I think is just the speed. I mean, Jalen Hurts is a really good athlete, but Jalen Milroe's speed is different. It's the type of thing that will, if he runs at the combine, it'll create a buzz like Anthony Richardson did when he was coming out in that draft. And I just, if a team was willing to buy into the flashes that Anthony Richardson showed on tape, Milroe's done a lot more than Richardson has at the college level, and still has
Fair enough.
some more games to go. So that's not, and it's not to comp them as players; they're different players. Again, I think Jalen Hurts is kind of the closest thing to that, because Hurts he's a physical runner. I mean, he is. If Jalen Milroe wanted to be a running back, I think it'd be a heck of a running back.
He could be a
So
tight end. Yeah, there's so many players.
Oh yeah,
I go
he could do a lot
back
of those
again.
things.
What, to your point, Dane, what Baltimore did when they decided to go all in on Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has grown leaps and bounds as a passer, but you're still not going to ask him to be a pocket passer. If you take Lamar Jackson and you take Justin Fields, I'm like, put Jalen Milroe, physical runner, the way Justin Fields was with the athleticism, but again, where Justin missed over the top. Again, just put the ball a little short to give the guy a chance. Again, that's where watching this, the last couple of weeks for Jalen Milroe, I'm like, man, it's a little bit more of a Justin Fields body type with that Lamar Jackson, athleticism, speed. Man, it's a fun conversation. But again, to your point, Dane, got to go all in. John Harbaugh went all in, and you've got a 3-time MVP candidate who's maybe going to win another one as that Baltimore team playing really well. Holy cow. Does anybody else we need to mention? We didn't even get to Quinn Ewers, who has not taken the steps.
I got to hear about Quinn Ewers. Where do you got him? What do you like? What do you think about him, Dane? 30 seconds on him.
It's tough, because he's obviously we've seen so much of him over the last 3 years, and I still feel like it's hard to have true conviction about him,
100%.
about who he is, and that in and of itself is kind of tough, because why, when we have all this film of Quinn Ewers, why don't we have a better feeling for what he is? Obviously I think he was clearly banged up in that Georgia game, coming back from that rib injury, the strain that he had in his midsection. That kind of, he's been hurt each of the last 3 years, where he's missed some games. And so in the NFL, it doesn't get any, the hits don't get lighter. And so can he hold up physically? That's part of this conversation as well. There's a lot to like about Ewers. I think that, if you told me the over under on Ewers is the 50th pick, I'm probably taking the under. I just think there's too much there that a team's going to say, hey, we'll roll the dice here and see what we have. But opinions are going to be all over the place. Same thing with like Drew Allar from Penn State, who has a lot of ability. I would love to see him go back to school.
That's a Nussmeier situation, isn't it?
Yeah, he's got a little bit more experience. And this is his second year starting, so he's got a little bit more. But watching him on the Ohio State tape, like, where are the receivers? Like, he's not even able to make plays down the field because no one's getting open for him. And if I'm Drew Allar, I'm going to the coaching staff and saying, I want to come back, but you better use some of that NIL money to go get some receivers and go get some guys that we can really push this offense, because we're going to lose Tyler Warren. We're going to lose probably at least one of our running backs to the draft. We need more firepower on offense. And so I will come back, but because I want to get better, and I believe I can do that here, but you have to get me more help, especially on the outside. Guys that, if you asked an average college football fan to name one of Penn State's receivers, I bet you most of them couldn't.
Yeah, it's a fascinating quarterback class. And then
Carson Beck, we didn't really
even get to Carson Beck.
The way he's playing, the way he's pressing. What do you do with him?
Lost.
Because this time last year, he was getting better with every game. There are NFL throws on his film. The coaches trusted him implicitly. He was making checks at the line. It's so annoying in today's college football, where the quarterbacks are just looking over the sideline. They're maybe not as much now with the communication being different, but Carson Beck's doing everything based off his pre-snap reads. Like, he's a smart guy. But this year, it just looks so much harder for him. And part of that is not having Brock Bowers, not having Ladd McConkey. The offensive line does not look good. That's a big part of this. But I think that has also kind of shown a light on Carson Beck's struggles to have those second reaction plays. And we know in the NFL, that's kind of a requisite of if you're going to be a starter in the NFL, things will always break down. Things will not go according to plan. Can you move your feet and make plays? And Beck will do that here and there, but consistently he is throwing it to the wrong team and not moving the offense. So, yeah, the Carson Beck discussion is a tough one where if the draft were tomorrow, I don't think he's a lock to be drafted in the top 100 picks.
Yeah. It's he is a fascinating one, a monumental fall. And again, we've still got a playoff. We've still got SEC championships. We've still got a long time. Again, hopefully, again, at the end of the day, every scout wants to see these guys play their best football at the end of the year and make it a tough decision come pre-draft process. And, see these
one
guys
last thing about these quarterbacks. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But one last thing about these quarterbacks. I want the listeners and fans to understand that there's going to be no consensus.
No consensus this year.
Quarterback one, others are going to have in the league, outside the league, they're going to have a different view of these quarterbacks. Like, it's just every year there's no consensus, but especially this year where all these guys have warts and you're going to choose different things to really point to and say, okay, I'll trust that. That is something that if I'm going to sell this quarterback to a room, to my GM, this is what I'm going to harp on. And it's just going to be different for every team in terms of their risk level, how they feel about the player. So anybody, looking for a consensus in this draft when it comes to the quarterbacks, you're not going to find it because it's going to be all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dane, holy cow, that's a lot of players in a short amount of time. We're going to have you back when juniors declare, because again, there's going to be 5 to 10 guys that really haven't been mentioned anywhere. They're going to pop up onto these top 50 lists that maybe you got them in your back pocket. Scouts are keeping them in their back pocket, doing their work on them. But again, nationally, maybe we just don't know them yet. So we'll certainly have you back if you'll be back. But if you haven't checked yet, make sure you go over, check out Dane Brugler's new updated top 50 list over at The Athletic. I'm sure you'll get it posted out there on Twitter, on X as well, right, Dane?
No doubt. Probably the best way to find it, go to my Twitter at DP Brugler, and I'll have it pinned there at the top.
Awesome. Well, this has been holy cow. I love talking players. I don't know if you can tell out there. If you're only listening, it was all smiles today. If you're watching on video, I'm sorry. But, you could obviously see it was all smiles and a lot of fun today. Still football to be played. That's the exciting thing. Some of these guys, again, you got about a month and a half for some of these guys to go all the way through the college football playoff, maybe 6-7 more games to put their final stamp on their pre-draft grade. So we hope and we look forward to these guys playing all the way through it. So it's been fantastic. If you're an agent out there, make sure you go check out Agent Live 360. That's all I'm going to tell you. Check it out. I'll give you the demo. Again, if you want to watch these players, if you want more on these players, hit up Neil. Hit up Dane, hit up myself on Twitter, on X. Again, maybe we'll be able to put in whatever characters we can, do a little highlight for you, whatever it is. Hit us up. Let us know your thoughts. If you have a top 50, get it posted up there. But again, keep watching football, keep enjoying the game, and in everything you do, keep scouting.